consumer complaints a year.
Just in that office?
No, just
no, statewide. So if it goes through, it all goes. Yeah, but I mean statewide. Yeah. I mean that's it's a.
I'm glad to
a
hear
lot
that's
of folks.
not just a Clark County.
Yeah.
No, it goes
For how much we complain.
Right, exactly. Yeah. No, there's plenty of work in that department to go around.
There is, and I have a hunch that a good percentage of the time the people are probably rightfully aggrieved, and a lot of the times they just don't understand what they bought or signed up for.
Yeah, I think it's fair. It's a combination. You know, one thing that's not well known about that program, I won't go too much into it, but we always have folks, so anyone who writes or calls with a complaint, they always get a response. And what we do is, someone writes a complaint with X business, we then write to that business and say, hey, we received the following complaint, would you like to respond? And just through that process, no legal action, just at that point, then the entity and the individual often will communicate, and millions of dollars are returned to Washingtonians just with that letter to us. We don't do anything further. We just say, hey, we got this. Do you want to respond?
Okay.
And literally, it's millions of dollars every year that just informally get worked out through that process. So it works.
So there's a happy ending for some of the
there's often is. Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. No, we get numbers for it if you want, but it's a big operation. We just have a lot of staff, but that's their job, is to handle those calls,
So
handle those complaints.
what happens if they don't resolve it? I mean,
Sure.
is it up to them to take the next step with you?
So once it's in our system, my consumer protection team, they meet every week and they're tracking the complaints that come in.
Oh, good.
So now, look, we sometimes have big litigation that comes from one single complaint. Sometimes, as you might imagine, if they realize, hey, we just got 30 complaints about X entity with the same complaint, they're talking about that. That's interesting. What's going on there? Maybe we should check that out. So I don't want to suggest it always has to be a whole bunch. Literally, some big cases have come from a single complaint, but that they track those trends in terms of, hey, is there something going on? Maybe we should take a look at that. And the CP Consumer Protection Division has grown a lot in the last few years, but even so, the demands, you can imagine, Todd Bowers, the deputy in charge, he often says to me, you could double the number of attorneys and professional staff working consumer protection, they'd all be busy. They'd all be busy doing good work. And right now there's 27 attorneys, and the professional staff's got to be another 50 or so. Yeah, so it's a big operation. And but he literally says you could double that team, and they'd be busy. But we have grown that fairly significantly. We may have talked about that in past visits here, I can't remember, but when I started there were 11 attorneys, and now there's 27, and then all the professional staff to support that. And there's no, in the budget, there's no general fund dollars to support consumer protection, or the civil rights team, that there's no tax dollars involved.
So it pays for itself.
It pays for itself, and the millions go back to consumers, and we send millions back to the state of Washington. We had a big case last year that resolved for like $18 million, and we sent the check to the state because we had enough to keep our operations going. So it's that rare thing in state government, a moneymaker for the people, the government, and it pays for itself. Yeah.
Oh, we darn. That's kind of cool. I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's really cool.
All I know is to give them the phone number.
Right? No, it's all
go away.
And that takes that entire civil rights team that we created. That's doing a lot of the work we're doing right now with administration. A lot of that's the civil rights team does that work. The civil rights team is funded primarily through those consumer protection recovery. Yeah. So I want to create it. I didn't go ask the legislature for money. We just, we just did it from those recoveries. Yeah, invested into it.
Bob, I got a question for you about the
hang on one sec. Let's do some introductions.
Okay, good idea. Yeah, great. Yeah.
But that was really interesting. And actually, let's leave that on the video.
It's
running. It looks like okay. Good.
Welcome to Bob Ferguson, State of Washington Attorney General, and Shane. I'm sorry. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
I'm Shane Esquibel. I'm the Chief Deputy.
Okay, with the Attorney General's office.
Yes.
Welcome to the Columbian.
Thanks.
It's always a pleasure to have you in here. And just as you know, we are videotaping this. We'll post it unedited on our website for the benefit of our readers. And we were already kind of in a conversation. I'm sorry.
Go
ahead.
Fine. So there's been some discussion in the legislature, and I'm not sure exactly what the status of this is with any bills that might be addressing what I'm about to ask you about. But it's the motor vehicle registration problem and enforcing the law on the people who are in perpetual violation of that kind of stuff. And then I heard some discussion about a legislation that would reduce the amount of penalty on the theory that the cops won't enforce it if it's seen as too punitive, which I thought was a strange notion, that really we can't get the cops to do what they're supposed to do, and that is cite people who break the law.
Right.
But what's your take on the whole category there with the this problem, and is it conceivable that a statewide initiative would make some sense that might have some return on investment also, along with some of the other things that you mentioned?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot of bills going on right now related to it.
Okay.
We actually have one bill that addresses sort of one piece of the problem, which is that we've had a work group. I think we had legislation last year to create a work group on this. Maybe 2 years ago, the groups come out with a recommendation. It relates to a subset of that issue, which is you're an individual, you have these infractions in different jurisdictions. Now you have different payment plans in different jurisdictions, but if you miss one, now you can be, if you're, you can be driving improperly, right? You can now be caught in a criminal justice system because you've missed a payment in one county when you were good with the other counties. In other words, it's not one system in place, right? And so there's been a lot of individuals from both law enforcement, but also from the community saying, hey, can we get one unified system? Like Spokane County, I think, unified their county, at least. The city, there's different cities in the county, so if you get, I mean, if you cross a city line, you get a speeding ticket. I mean, it should be one system where you're paying into, right? And, but why can't we do that for the entire state? And so we have a proposal, legislative proposal this year to do that. So I think it helps address that issue where people know there's one place to go, and then you're not caught up in the system of you haven't paid for an infraction somewhere, you get pulled over, now you're driving with a suspended license, for example, wherever you get caught in a criminal justice system.
I'm not so focused on the infraction piece, but the registration of the vehicle in the state.
Oh,
that's
in terms of
just changing the license plate to, like in Vancouver, there's a lot of incentive to drag from people who move from Portland to Vancouver.
Yes.
To just flake out on getting their Oregon plates swapped over for Washington plates.
Right.
Because of the sales tax and
to fabricate an Oregon address and maintain Oregon.
And this issue we've talked about before, and I've been down here. Yeah, so I'm no expert on the legislation that's going on to address that. I just don't know what that. I mean, I'm not sure if you've seen that, but no, I'm not. There's a lot of legislation down there, but that's not one they brought to us or that we're proposing. So I just don't. I wouldn't be able to speak to that with any. With any degree of expertise. Yeah.
What are you, for your office? What are the legislative priorities this year?
Well, we have a lot of bills this year, so I won't by any means go through them all. But I'll pick some. A couple of the high-profile ones and give you a quick update on where they're at. In no particular order, of course, right? We have a proposal to raise the smoking age from 18 to 21, which I know we've talked about before, and I think you've written about before. A strong bipartisan support in both the House and the Senate. Last year it moved quite a bit. This year it's moving again, so we feel optimistic, but always a heavy lift. Any bill that's as consequential as that. The good news is there is a the revenue impact for the state. That has been an obstacle for us. That some legislators said, wait a second, if we do this, there's a budget hit to the state because fewer teenagers are buying cigarettes. You're not getting that sales tax revenue, which is significant for cigarettes. So there's a short term a budget hit. I don't think we should balance our budget on the backs of getting teenagers addicted to tobacco, but that's another conversation. But they've revised their budget numbers. It's down much more. I think it's $5 million a year, I think is what they're saying is the budget impact to the state of raising smoking age to 21. So we feel good about that legislation moving through and strong bipartisan support. Number two, going just quickly through them, proposal to abolish the death penalty in Washington state. Last year, it just didn't even get a vote in either committee, either in the Democratic-controlled House or in the Republican-controlled Senate. So the Judiciary, Law, and Justice Committees there was a hearing in the House, not in the Senate, but there wasn't even a vote. There's not even been a vote at the committee level on the death penalty since the death penalty was reinstated in Washington state, 1981. I hope I got the year right. But a number of years ago, we reinstated the death penalty. There's not even been a vote in the committee about the death penalty. The Senate Law and Justice Committee, chaired by Jamie Peterson, State Senator Jamie Peterson, had a vote last week. Yeah, a week or two ago. It passed out of committee. It's been sent to the Rules Committee. And so it's entirely possible that could end up on the floor for a vote on the Senate. I think that's a close vote. Give me my sense. We're in the process of counting.
And the state reinstated that in the early 80s sometime.
Yeah, that's right.
And has there, subsequently, has there been a statewide vote on the death penalty?
I don't believe so, no. And there was some discussion last year, as you may recall, the prosecuting attorneys from around the state. I think they actually, their recommendation, I think their actual formal position of the prosecuting attorneys, by the Washington State Association of Prosecuting Attorneys, I think they even had a recommendation to say, let's put it to the voters. The legislature chose not to do that, and so it's back before them now to abolish it. There was some discussion in the committee hearing, at least one legislator said, hey, what about putting it to the people? You know, my view is, you know, the legislature should be paying for it to take votes sometimes on tough issues, and I think that's what they should do. So if it gets through the Senate, which I think is entirely possible, it then obviously would go to the House, and Representative Lori Jenkins chairs the Law and Justice Committee. I'm confident she would hear that bill and take a vote, and the votes are there in the committee. So it's, you know, it's one of those bills where double things happen. It could move. If not, it could stay where it's at and not move. So I'm glad they moved it through a committee and had a vote there. I think there's a good chance it ends up on the floor of the Senate.
What's the reasoning behind backing that bill? I'm not sure.
For me to be back in the bill?
Right.
Well, our office is involved in the death penalty, number one. So I try to make proposals that are somehow related to my office.
Sure.
So we handle the habeas appeals for when the county prosecutors bring them. When it gets into federal appeals, we have a legal team that handles those. So we're, number one, we're involved in it. Number two, there are many reasons to oppose the death penalty. And you know, each person, we had a press conference last year when Rob McKenna came out against the death penalty. What struck me about that press conference was a number of people spoke, Democrats and Republicans. Everybody spoke about why they wanted to abolish the death penalty, had a slightly different reason. For some folks, it was the finances. It's far more expensive to have someone executed. You get lengthy appeals. You need those appeals, make sure you don't execute someone who's innocent. But there's lengthy appeals. It's more expensive to have someone executed than to have someone walked away for the rest of their life. For others, it's a moral objection, right? For others, it's a religious objection. For others, I think Rob McKenna's words were, I hope I'm paraphrasing him correctly, and he said, look, the system just doesn't work. You know, all sorts of reasons kind of went to it, it's a broken system. I think Dan Satterberg, who's the Republican prosecuting attorney in King County, had a similar argument. He came out with the editorial just a couple weeks ago. Right. He's now come out in opposition to it. So, look, do I think it's inevitable that the death penalty be abolished in Washington State? Yes, I think that's happening. Whether it's this year, next year, I can't speak to, but I think this is going just one direction.
Along those lines, do you think, is it better for that to take place in the legislature, or should it go to a vote of the people?
I mean, I'm a believer in the legislature taking votes on big issues. I am. I mean, look, we're a state with a populist tradition. That's why we have a strong initiative process, and that's wonderful. But look, every legislator has a position on the death penalty. You know, take the vote. You know, just take the vote. I'm open on what I think about it. It's controversial. I understand that, but that's why we have a legislature. That's their job, and so I don't think it's the job of legislature.
I'm guessing if the legislature did pass that, if they did abolish it, that the governor would sign it.
Yes, I'm
Right.
I'm sure that's right. And another bill that's on the gun side is in Washington State. If any of us wanted to buy a handgun and you walked into a Cabela's to buy that handgun, you've got to be 21 years old, and you cannot walk out of the Cabela's with that handgun. You fill out a form, and you have an up to 10-day waiting period while law enforcement does a background check on it. In order to buy an AR-15, like was an assault weapon, you only have to be 18 years old in Washington State. You have to be 21, you have to be 18. When you walk into Cabela's, an 18-year-old can walk out with the AR-15. There is no waiting period while law enforcement does a background check. It doesn't exist. They are treated as long rifles. Long rifles, you only have to be 18, and there is no waiting period. And but essentially, assault weapons are lumped in with long rifles. Look, I don't think that makes a whole hell of a lot of sense. If you've got to be 21 to buy a handgun, you got to wait up to 10 days with a waiting period. I think you should be 21 to buy an AR-15 and have a waiting period. That seems common sense to me. And the Mukilteo shooting that you're probably familiar with from a year or so ago, a 19-year-old walked into Cabela's, walked out that I think it was an AR-15, walked out the assault weapon, and you know what happened from there, right? Read the instructions outside the house.
That's one way the instruction guide in the car.
Read the instructions and went into the house and killed 3 of his former classmates. So it's not a theoretical conversation. So we have a proposal to make it 21 to buy. Long rifles remain 18, but to buy an assault weapon, you'd be 21. And that has not had a vote yet in either the House or the Senate Law and Justice Judiciary Committees. It just goes to what a challenge it is to move any.
What was the genesis? How did those get lumped in with long rifles?
I don't know. I mean, just definitionally back, they just were. That's just where they were put in. I'm not sure a whole lot of thought was given to it at the time, right? And look, I think the idea for long rifles is, hey, 18-year-olds hunting, that type of stuff, great.
Sure.
I don't have a problem with that. But I don't think it makes sense for an AR-15 to be lumped in with a rifle that 18-year-olds are using to go hunting, for example. But as common sense as that is, you know, it's still uphill to get that to the legislature. Like I said, we don't even have a vote yet. We're hoping to get a vote this week. The cutoff is this week to get it through at least the House or the Senate Judiciary Law and Justice Committees. But we'll see if that happens. But that's you know, that's an important bill that we have going on that hopefully will move this year. So those are a few of the ones, you know, we've got a lot going on, but those are a few that we have this session.
One of the things that we've been watching, because we have a bit of a vested interest, is the public records law being expanded to the legislature.
Yeah.
So what's your take on that, and what's going to happen next?
I mean, a lot of thoughts on that. We've had an unusual position, as you know, in that litigation. You know, typically we represent the state,
Right.
and we take the position that our client wants,
Right.
right? As long as we think there's good arguments, as long as they have arguments, right? They're not frivolous. That's our job, of course. So this is unusual in that we are not representing the state, the legislature. The legislature chose to hire outside counsel to represent them on the lawsuit from the media on the Public Records Act. I want to emphasize, we of course communicated to the legislature we would represent them. You know, we would represent them. We absolutely communicated that to them. They chose not to. You know, I didn't get a phone call about it. We just had a letter, a one-sentence letter saying we hired outside counsel.
Did they give you any reasoning for that? Why would they choose outside counsel? You want to speculate on why they would do that? Okay.
Definitely not. Yeah. Okay. And so I just want to be clear. You know, we offer that. That's our job, right? Whether I personally agree or disagree with the client's position, you know, as long as they got arguments, we're making them. We do that every day, all the time. And so then what happened? Of course, they hired an outside law firm, a very good firm, by the way. And when they went before the judge for one of the hearings, the judge realized the AG's office wasn't involved in the litigation, and from our perspective, not surprisingly, said, hey, we'd like the AG's office, I'd like the AG's office to file a brief in this case. So we were asked by the court to file the brief. At that time, the legislature then changed their mind and decided they want us to represent them. My view was, you know, they had their counsel, and the court had asked us to file a brief, and we're going to file the brief. And so our position was that the legislature is subject to the Public Records Act, just like the rest of the world.
Yeah.
So, you know, on the, just one more thing on that aspect, I mean, the legislature's attorneys and in their brief said it was inappropriate for us to have filed the amicus brief and objected to the court. The court did, in his ruling, refer to that argument as being, in his words, wholly without merit, were the words he used to dismiss the idea that it was inappropriate for us to file the brief. So, is it an unusual situation? You bet. But, you know, when the court asks us to file a brief, we're going to do that. We couldn't remember a time we'd ever not filed a brief when a court asked us to. So the legislature's appealed it, as you know.
Right.
Look, do I think from a legal standpoint they're subject to it? Yes, that's in our brief. And do I just think from a policy standpoint, just from a good government standpoint, they should be subject to it? Yeah, I do, right? And I think just one thing I would say is that there have been some bills now proposed at the legislature that would create some exemptions for the legislature. You know, I'm skeptical of exemptions for the legislature, but it just seems to me whatever the system is that the legislature looks to put in place, it should be the same for all elected officials. They shouldn't treat the local sewer district members or your local county council or me different than the legislature. They're not special in any regard when it comes to the Public Records Act. I mean, they're just not. We were in White Salmon yesterday for a Rotary. A member of a local official came up after, and it was, man, the Public Records Act, we've got these challenges, what can we do? I know the legislature's doing their thing. Hey, everyone, right, it's consequential to everybody. You know, the impacts, the cost. I think those costs are worth bearing for transparency, but there are real impacts to all sorts of governments, and in some respects, the smaller, more local governments have the fewer resources to handle some of that. So my just view is the legislature wants to create exemptions. I may or may not agree with them, but they should make it for everybody. So that's just they shouldn't just have it just for the legislature. It should just be for all elected officials. If it's good enough for the legislature, it should be good enough for everybody. Yeah. So we'll see legally where things go. But the judge's ruling, Judge Lanise, good judge, was pretty emphatic in his ruling.
Yeah, and speaking of appeals,
Yeah.
The governor the other day rejected the oil terminal proposal here. Well, what's the process from here? Where does it go legally if the companies decide to appeal that.
Yeah, and so it goes to well, technically go through the Thurston County Superior
Okay.
Court, but it almost always, as I understand it, Shane, goes to the Supreme Court, is that right?
The Superior Court can certify it to the Supreme Court.
Okay.
And every appeal that we've ever had from FSEC has gone straight to the Supreme Court.
I see.
They've got 30 days to file that appeal
Right.
from the day of the decision, so
Yeah.
if they file it, it would almost certainly go essentially directly to the state Supreme Court.
Why does it start in Thurston?
It starts, and that's just the way the statute's set up, yeah, it just starts, but it almost certainly would go straight to the Supreme Court via the Thurston County, but they wouldn't have a whole hearing at Thurston County, it would simply be
Okay.
certified to go to the state Supreme Court. I don't want to speak for Thurston County Court, but that is how it's happened in the past, each and every time something like this would be a likely outcome. And then when the Supreme Court reviews the decision, maybe just chat about how they review it, or what their the standard review.
So the standard review, the legal review is de novo, so they look anew at what the governor decided and what the recommendations of FSEC were. Because there's a factual record too, they will also look to see if the evidence and the factual record supports the decision that was made. So it's kind of a mixed review of.
Okay.
That they give more discretion to the findings when it comes to the factual findings, right?
Right.
There's more deference given to that.
Yeah.
Okay.
But on the rest, they just kind of look at it fresh. So it's a little unusual. It's what we call a mixed review. Some parts of it, there's great deference given, right, on the facts. On the legal side, the court can look at it fresh.
So they're looking at the facts in addition to just if the law was applied correctly, which would be, the way I understand it, most appeals are about whether the law was applied correctly.
That's correct. They'd be looking at the facts that helped inform those decisions. That's
Makes
right.
sense. What's the timeline on that? I'm sure every case is different, but is there any kind of rough timeline for that?
For the Supreme Court to hear it and
And
potentially
make a decision, right?
it would be. I mean, it would. It's going to take some time.
Yeah.
It would take some time. I mean, they would set a brief if this court.
Well, what does that mean? Does that mean a year? Does it mean 3 months?
It would be more than 3. I mean, I don't want to speak to the court. The court does their
Right,
timelines
the
every time. I want to emphasize that, right? I mean, we respect whatever
Yeah,
timeline they
we're
want.
asking, you're the color
clear.
commentator, not the player.
Exactly. So, but I would say no. It would. I would
Several months, I think it's fair to say.
It's fair. Several months. It could even be a year. I mean, it can be. But I wouldn't. Once they appeal, get to the court. Typically, you'll see a briefing schedule. The court's taking case. They lay out a briefing schedule, and then you have a greater sense of okay. Here's when the briefs are due. Here's when there's going to be an argument. If there's going to be one. Then you can start drawing some conclusions about when a decision might come. Some cases get decided quickly. Some they can take a year or more to make a decision. Right? There's just a huge.
And then it would just be a majority vote on the court?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. That's exactly right. Yeah. Yeah.
So would they be voting either, would their choice be to uphold the governor's decision, or could they themselves overturn it, or would they send it back through the process?
I assume all the above essentially. Right? They've got.
Okay.
The court has great discretion
have-
to.
okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we could follow, but I'm sure that's right. They would have a lot of discretion how they want to handle that. Yeah.
Where do we stand regarding legalized marijuana
So, yeah.
and
Yeah.
the state and the U.S. Attorney General Jeff Sessions has said the federal government will crack down on states that have legalized marijuana. Where does that stand?
A lot to unpack there. I'll try and give a relatively short answer and feel free to follow up because it's a big one.
Sure.
So, I mean, I guess the first thing I would say is that Attorney General Sessions' recent announcement, it was disappointing to put it mildly. So rolling back what we call the Cole Memorandum, which was issued, I think, in summer of 2013, which essentially, of course, said, hey, it's not a priority for U.S. attorneys in Washington and Colorado to go prosecute marijuana cases, right? And it gave what I thought were helpful guidelines, priorities that the federal government had for Washington and Colorado as we set up our system. Make sure kids don't get their hands on marijuana, make sure marijuana's not getting beyond state borders. Hey, we agree with all those. And we felt we moved forward in a productive way to address those concerns and to set up a good system. So the decision by the Attorney General to rescind that guidance it's unclear exactly what it means, candidly, right? We've asked for meetings, myself, the governor asked for meetings with Attorney General Sessions. He's not granted any of those. In contrast, U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder, we had a meeting within, I think, 2 weeks when I took office with the governor to meet with him to talk about it. Didn't mean that we agreed with the federal government. I mean, there were disagreements in those conversations, but at least you're having a face-to-face conversation. That's
When did
lacking
you
now.
first request a meeting with?
Oh my gosh! As soon as he became Attorney General.
Right, that's what I thought.
About a year ago.
as soon as he became Attorney General, we would have had that. And I mean, you can just, I'll put it out there, like there was a letter a number of AGs signed when Attorney General Sessions was going through the appointment process, objecting to his appointment as U.S. Attorney General. I didn't sign that letter. Not because I didn't have concerns about Attorney General Sessions and the comments he made, but I thought to myself, well, I need to work with this guy. Marijuana is a big one. I don't want to sign this letter that was pretty tough on him and then be asking for a meeting and, right? So, you know, I try to be thoughtful about how we're taking this approach, and hey, it's nothing personal, we're just having a conversation, but despite that, we're unable to get that meeting, which then leads to, you know, challenge that. You know, he sent a letter to myself and the governor a few months ago, long letter, but which, as you know, was riddled with just factual mistakes. There's no way to sugarcoat that, right? He relied on a report from a couple of years ago. I think his first thing he accused of is not having a system that had combined our medical and recreational marijuana systems together, relying on that old report. But of course, since our program we had, and you know, to me that's embarrassing that the U.S. Attorney General on an issue of that importance is writing a letter to a governor and attorney general of their state, and he's just got his facts wrong. That's a problem, I think. I think this is a problem in trying to move forward on these issues. So, you know, we are, and have been really for a long time, prepared if there needs to be a legal fight on the future of marijuana legalization in Washington State. We hope it doesn't come to that, but we've always felt that way. But, and I still hope if he wants to meet, we'd still be happy to meet and talk through some of these issues.
Have you met with anybody from the DOJ about this?
Yeah, do you recall who was, Darwin was in on a meeting, right, with, did you recall who from our office in the state was there with folks from DOJ? A couple months ago.
Okay.
Bruce Turcotte's the AAG, the Assistant Attorney General office, who is the point person on marijuana.
Okay.
And they met with some DOJ officials back in DC, right? And that was.
But not the Attorney General. No. Well, when you say you hope it doesn't come to a legal fight on that, what could trigger that? What sort of action by the feds would lead you to challenge that?
I mean, they could, hypothetically speaking, right? There can be a business that's licensed in Washington State selling marijuana that's following state law. Let's assume they're following state law to a T. That's important, right? They're following state law, and the feds go in and try to shut that business down. Right? They seize the marijuana or the proceeds. If, in my view, we've got a business, legitimate business, playing by our rules here in Washington State, and the federal government comes in to try to shut that down, we'd be interested in that. Or any step that's taken to just adversely impact the system as a state that we have going forward. That would be, you know, that'd be something we'd be paying close attention to, and I just view my role as, my job is to defend and enforce state law, including initiatives. So whether that challenge comes through a lawsuit or through some action taken by the federal government, we'd be paying attention to that and likely taking, I mean, each case is different, right? It's in terms of what our role might be. But we'd be paying close attention and potentially getting involved legally. Yeah.
So that could be the trigger for a case then, is if they came in and shut down Main Street marijuana and seized their inventory and arrested everybody and on federal drug dealing charges.
Yes. And again, a key part for us, I mean, that business following state law. Right?
Correct.
If they're doing something different, that's not, okay, that's a different situation. But if it's a business just following our rules and they're a business, minding their own business, selling marijuana, yes, that would get our attention for sure. So, you know, I don't want to absolutely commit to any course of action. Each situation can be factually different, but yet in general, if there is a threat to our industry, that would have our attention.
And the issue here is that under federal law, marijuana remains illegal, but it has been legalized in Washington and several others.
And a growing number of states now as well. So, look, you can have a potential legal fight, which I avoid speaking about publicly for obvious reasons about whether federal law preempts state law when it comes to marijuana, and you know, we think we have good arguments, but there would potentially be a legal fight along those lines. Yeah. So big issue. We are interested in knowing. We've been reaching out to, hey, if there are, as a result of Attorney General Sessions' decision to roll back the full memorandum, has anyone been adversely impacted by that? Has a bank stopped working with them, for example, no longer taking the proceeds from their sales? We're interested if there's any adverse impacts from that decision on any businesses out there, and folks that we're interested in hearing from them.
Have you heard of any impact?
I guess I've got to check back in. It's just in the last couple weeks we put the word out. So what we've heard,
a few things.
yeah, I mean, there have been conversations, and So we know Purcell, who's my Solicitor General, is kind of leading our marijuana effort, so we check in from time to time, but we sort of just put that word out just in the last, I think, week or two, so I've not had a chance to get the complete download from NOAA yet on that. But we're interested in hearing from folks if they're experiencing that.
Now, excuse me, another issue, drug related, is your office, the state, is suing the maker of OxyContin.
Yeah.
Is that accurate?
Yes, that's okay. Purdue Pharma.
Right. Where does that stand?
I'm glad you brought up opioids. That's on the legislative front. I don't want to go through the whole list, but we have a couple bills there that are really important. So on the lawsuit first, we filed, I guess now it's been a few months ago. You know, when you take on someone like Purdue Pharma, they will, I mean, it's going to be scorched earth litigation. I mean, it's just, they're going to, every inch of ground you're trying to move forward to get to a trial date will be contested. And then some.
How many states are involved in that suit?
That's just us.
Okay.
So there was, taking a step back, there is a multi-state investigation going on. As you know, we never talk about our investigations, but we were a leader of that investigation. We're on the executive committee as that multi-state of 40 plus states was moving forward. We didn't say anything publicly about it because it was still in the investigation stage. I made a decision maybe middle of last year, I guess, right, to pull out of that investigation, which is unusual. I don't want to be critical of my colleagues. They're doing important work with their investigation, but you know, I felt we were ready, and it's a crisis, and it was time to move from the investigation stage to filing a lawsuit stage. So again, no hard feelings with the multi-state investigation. I look forward to the results of that investigation, but we were one of the first states to simply file our own lawsuit. There have been now a growing number of states since we filed that have sued or have announced that they want to file their own lawsuits. The multi-state is still going forward. So it's a little bit complicated now, but Washington's filed its own suit.
If other states do file, would those be combined? How does that work?
So good question. So actually right now is that judge in Ohio? Mm-hmm. In Ohio, there's a judge who is combining all the lawsuits from cities and counties, individuals as well, I think, right, are all being combined in Ohio before a single judge. And there's a big meeting there this week, next week?
It's
Today? Today, sorry, we're losing track of the days. Yeah, today, it's today. There's a big meeting of the attorneys and the parties there. Now, the judge cannot compel I'll spare you the legal analysis, but cannot compel a state's case to join that, okay? But the judge did invite us to attend that meeting. And so we sent Jeff Rupert, one of our attorneys involved in that, to that meeting. The judge's goal, he said this publicly, so it's not sharing a state secret, the judge has said he wants to get the parties together and see if there's a way to work out a resolution, a global resolution, as opposed to having a bunch of trials and a bunch of courts take up a ton of judicial resources. Hey, maybe we can work out one resolution here in my courtroom, is what he said.
No, sorry for interrupting.
That's right, yeah.
I believe Everett has filed its lawsuit, and Seattle
Correct.
has as well. Okay.
Correct.
So would they be included in? Okay.
That's exactly right. So Everett has been included in that, for example. That's exactly right. So they had their own litigation going, but now they're, I don't mean swept up in a pejorative way, but they are now part of that.
Okay.
They've been consolidated in Ohio. So we are, the judge cannot require a state case like ours to join that. So our plan is just to proceed with what we're doing, but we will participate in those conversations. We think that's great if the judge wants us to be there. To our earlier point, when a judge asked us, to do something, we want to participate, and so we're there today in that conversation. And hey, if there's a resolution outside of litigation, wonderful, but to your point about the litigation, it's Purdue's caused a lot of harm in our state, and they need to be held accountable. And it's worth pointing out, we're doing that work in-house. I think every other state but one has hired outside counsel. Contingency fee basis hired outside counsel. I can understand why, because it's such a huge body of work, right? We are attempting to do it on our own. We will reevaluate that, like we had a conversation just last week about resources, because it's a huge, Purdue Pharma is not messing around. They have every resource money can buy to defend themselves. They're not messing around. And so it's a big, big, heavy lift. When I talk about growing that consumer protection division, part of that was we could handle a case like this, right? That we get a big case and still do our day-to-day work. That's not on the front page of the paper. But you've got to, you can't bring a knife to a gunfight, right? You've got to be prepared. And that's what it takes in this one. But we will reevaluate that as we go forward to make sure we have the resources we need.
So what exactly has the state sued Purdue for?
Yeah, so we have multiple claims, a consumer protection claim, right, a nuisance claim, for example. So taking like the consumer protection claim is you cannot engage in unfair or deceptive business practice in our state. That's literally what the RCW says. And it's a lengthy complaint, many, many pages, but at its essence, like on the consumer protection side, we're saying that Purdue was unfair and deceptive in how they talked about OxyContin.
Okay.
They made representations this was not a particularly addictive substance. They testified in Congress to that effect. They communicated to doctors to that effect. It's not true. And they knew it wasn't true. And so, one thing we write about in our complaint is that when doctors started reporting back to Purdue Pharma that they were seeing patients coming back who had been taking OxyContin and were showing symptoms of being addicted to it. And they were coming back in, and the doctors were contacting Purdue Pharma saying, hey, what's going on? We're seeing all these people come back. They're addicted to this stuff, and you said it wasn't all that addictive. OxyContin's response to them was they created a term called pseudo-addiction. They told those doctors, this is our complaint, they told those doctors, no, those individuals are not addicted to those pills. That's what we call pseudo-addiction. They're not really addicted. What they're showing are symptoms of being in pain. So you only get one guess what Purdue Pharma recommended to those doctors to do.
More pain pills.
More pain pills.
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure what to say about that, right? I mean, right? So that case makes me angry in many respects. For profits, for profit, and so it's yeah.
So where is the case now, and what would be a logical time frame on that?
Could be years.
Yeah.
Could be years. I mean, it's going to be a grind. Is that the case where they were filing there's a motion to dismiss maybe coming? Is that?
Yeah.
I think it would, like, for example, they filed a motion to dismiss in the Everett case, I believe.
Right.
I think I've got that right.
Mm-hmm.
Which Everett survived before they got pulled into the Ohio thing.
Yeah.
So we expect a similar thing. They'll file a motion to dismiss. I mean, everything will be contested. So a case like this to go to trial. I mean, it's not too dissimilar from the tobacco litigation with Esquibel. And that case actually started in trial in King County before it settled, and it took a long, long time to get from, you're right, because even the investigation takes a long time, then you file the complaint, and the court system, it's going to take some time. So, but that's why we thought so carefully before filing that lawsuit. You just know going into it, it's going to take a lot of resources. So you just don't make that decision lightly. One advantage of the multi-state is you're all sharing the load. That's the advantage. The downside is you're only as aggressive as your least aggressive state.
Mm-hmm.
In a resolution, you'll only get as much as the weakest state wants to ask for. That's just a fact. That's the weakness of the multi-state. The advantages are tremendous. You get to share all those resources. It's not just your office handling the whole case. So there's trade-offs to it, but I felt in this case, the right trade-off was find the lawsuit and move forward. But it'll take a while. Yeah, it'll take a while. But the next thing to look forward to be, I would anticipate a motion, the next major thing would be, I would expect a motion to dismiss, where they would come and say, hey, this case, there's no merit, judge, toss it out, and we'd be battling over that. That'd be the first big thing you'd see in the courtroom would be a motion to dismiss. That'd be the likely next step.
So if they file something like that, how long does it take to argue just that piece of it?
Well, there'd be a briefing schedule set up for it, and but relatively quickly. That would be more than a couple months, right? Exactly. Yeah, you get your brief response, brief reply. Judge sets a hearing, have your argument. Judge takes some time to consider a decision. All that can take, a few months. Yeah. Yeah. But by the way, on opioids, I should mention on the legislative front, we have proposed. There are a number of bills on that issue in the legislature. We proposed two. I'll just highlight very quickly. One is a bill that requires pill limits. There are exceptions, of course. You're a cancer patient, you have ongoing pain. Of course, there are exceptions for this, but you're getting your wisdom teeth pulled, for example. And I think I was 19, I had my wisdom teeth pulled. Did I need a 30-day supply of opioids to deal with that? No, right? One of two things is going to happen. I'll take all 30 because I think, well, the doctor gave it to me, I should take them, or I take 2 or 3 and put the rest in the cabinet in the bathroom, and now my roommates or my kids or my spouse has access to those. None of those are good. So a number of states now are moving towards pill limits, 7-day supply. That's what our proposal is on this. We think it makes sense. The other proposal we have, which a number of other states have adopted, is we have in our state what's called a prescription monitoring program, the PMP. It's a system in place right now, the PMP, prescription monitoring program. And it tells you as a doctor if I'm prescribing, if the patient comes in and I'm prescribing to that patient opioids, I can see what their history is in terms of where they've been, different doctors, and getting opioids. So Greg comes in, I can look him up before there is no requirement though that I look up Greg's background before I prescribe. Many states require that upfront for a common sense reason. I can see if he's essentially pill shopping, right? It could be for personal addiction issues, or it could be for a criminal. He's getting pills to go sell on the streets, right? It could be both. In Washington State, we do not require, unlike, I think it's 19 states now, a growing number. Yeah, a growing number of states require doctors to check the PMP first. We're proposing that. I don't know if that'll get through or not. It seems common sense, but the Washington State, the Medical Association testified in opposition to it. I think it testified in opposition to pill limits as well. We'd have to double check, but you could ask them their thoughts on why they're opposed to it.
Now, why is it also alternatively an option to have the pharmacies check and balance it and not fill it?
I guess I don't know the answer to that. Yeah, I mean, I guess I should check my team on whether what the obligations are there, but it's not being checked now. I mean, there's no requirement to be checked, so as a result, it's often not. And it's and the thing is, the states that have adopted this requirement, New York, Kentucky, red states, blue states, they have seen positive results. Once you put these pill limits and the PMP in place, you see, hey, is it a hassle for doctors to check it? Yes. Is the computerized system perfect right now? No. They want it to be fully integrated. Other states have moved forward with the same challenges with the PMPs, right? And they're seeing results. So do I get that it's a hassle? Yes, but if it's a crisis, it's a crisis, right? And this group knows, right, how big of a crisis it is all across the state, but it's just a challenge to get that through.
There's so many different elements to that wobbliness in the supply. I heard a piece on NPR a couple days ago about an internet pharmacy which was recently discovered to be doing business. I forgot who went after that. It might have been a federal thing. But this pharmacy was prescribing thousands and thousands of people with just flat out illegal prescriptions.
Yes.
Crazy.
It is crazy. I think you guys might have done a story about a local.
Yeah, we have
doctor.
a high flyer here, a
Yes.
nurse practitioner, Kelly Bell.
Oh yeah.
And I think we
She
put
was mentioned
in our complaint.
Yes.
Yes, we have a much bigger story coming up on her in a couple of weeks because we got something like 10,000 pages of public records about her. It was 15 years of investigations before they did
interesting.
anything. And she's still a registered nurse. She's kept her license.
We'll be curious.
But she cannot prescribe.
She cannot prescribe
That is
opioids anymore,
my
but
understanding.
so
Got
she
it.
still is a registered nurse.
I'll be interested to see that. So that's an example of, in our complaint, part of it was sealed, right? And so we sought to have it unsealed, but that's an example. Everything, you're contesting everything, right? So we sought to have it unsealed. We were successful with that with our judge. That's how that became public, right?
Right, that's
And
how we
That
got
was
our
just a
records.
couple of weeks.
Correct.
Exactly. So, but no, that litigation, it's going to be protracted. That's the nature of it for sure. So those are two bills we have on the opioids front at the legislature this year. And one thing I just want to mention is that yesterday, as you probably know, we had an oral argument on the lawsuit we have against the administration on DACA Dreamers. And so that it was back in New York, so that's a case that we joined with other states. Washington was a lead state with New York, and Massachusetts. Colleen Melodies, the head of my civil rights unit, she was one doing oral argument there along with an attorney from New York. So the report from Colleen, we talked to her yesterday, she felt really good about the hearing. There were some news reports, I've not read them all, but we like the direction the judge seemed to be going with his comments there. We're not sure when a decision will come from that, but that was just yesterday, obviously, and on an important case that we have.
Now, how many times has your office filed suit against the Trump administration?
19. 19, yeah. And look, I've mentioned this a few times, is on the first case, the first travel ban, obviously we were the first state to sue him almost exactly a year ago. If you had told me on the day I made that decision that we were going to file 18 more lawsuits, it just wasn't part of the thinking at all. I mean, that wasn't, but, until the administration, in our view, chooses to follow the Constitution and federal law when enacting executive orders or other laws, we're going to see more of it. And it's worth pointing out 6 of those cases, we have decisions, we've won all 6. 5 of those, there's no more appeals. The cases are done. Like I'll often see, I don't read the comments, newspaper articles very often, but often the comments say, hey, well, these will all be reversed on appeal. No, 5 of those cases, they're done, they're over. There's no more appeals. The 6th one is the military transgender ban. That's a case we filed in the Western District of Washington with Judge Peckman. We got an injunction on it. They did not appeal the injunction, which kind of surprised me. But now we're just moving forward on the case itself. So an injunction's in place while we just go forward with the case. But in order to get an injunction, the judge has to, it's not easy an injunction, one thing the judge has to rule to grant us the injunction is that we are likely to prevail on the merits. That's actually one of the factors a judge has to reach before putting an injunction in place. So, we think the case is proceeding well, not taking anything for granted, but that's the 6th case that we would assume, if we were to prevail, would then go on appeal. But the other 5 have been decided, and the other 13 are, wherever they're at in the process,
Right.
but no decisions yet.
So the other 5 that have been decided, that was the original travel ban.
Travel ban, we have cases, a number of cases relating to, less high profile, but important in their own ways, of course. Of the overall 19, a significant number, and we have a chart on our website that lists every single case if you're curious, where they're at in the process, what's happened. But a number of cases relate to the Trump administration attempting to roll back environmental protections put in place by the Obama administration. They relate to climate change and other issues. And so I think of the 6, transgender military ban, first travel ban, I think the other 4, I want to double check, are related to environmental protections that we, along with other states, I want to emphasize each of those other 4 cases, I believe we joined with other states, like New York, and prevailed in those. So of the 19, I would want to emphasize, we're not the lead state in all 19, by any stretch of the imagination. I think 5 or 6, we filed our own, like the first travel ban, like the military transgender ban, where we are doing it here in the Western District of Washington. On other cases, we're very involved, like DACA, but very involved in other states, and others we're in a supportive role while another state really takes a lead. So it's a combination for those 19 suits of those 3 types of engagements on it. But if you're ever curious, we try to keep it updated on our website. There's just a whole list of each case, when it was filed, where it's at, what the has there been a result or not. It's all, we just try to be super transparent about. And we realize people have strong views on either side of what I'm doing there, and so we just want to be open about what cases we're filing. Yeah. And there is some, for what it's worth, we had this conversation, is a certain case against the administration, if you file against a certain agency, we're trying to be inclusive on that. I don't want someone saying, well, you're not saying that's against administration. So we're being fairly broad in how we call the administration. Right. I just wanted, that's it.
Right. Anything else? Bob, anything else we should ask about?
I don't know if there was, I didn't really have a list coming into it, so I think we've covered it pretty well. And no, appreciate the time we're heading to one of your rotaries. Which one are we in? I think it's my last Vancouver Rotary I haven't been to yet. So is that Warehouse 23?
Oh, there you go.
Oh, yeah, it's right down
3
the road.
blocks away.
3 blocks away.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah, that's next. That's my 110th Rotary Club meeting I've been to. So I'm there's like 170 in the state, so I'm getting to all of them. So
is that just this week, or does it just feel like it?
Say it again.
Is that your 110th Rotary this week?
It just feel like it. No, the Rotaries are a blast. Spike Salmon, they had a big crowd at the Lake Salmon Rotary. Yeah, it was great. And so I really, well, it's good because it gets you to every corner of the state. Sure. And so then you're talking about this stuff with, some parts of the state are more supportive than others, but you need to go.
A different reaction depending where you're at, huh?
Yeah, and that's okay. I mean, I view my job as talking about what I'm doing and why I'm doing it, and some folks will agree and some won't, but I want them to know how we make these decisions, why we do it, what our record is. I mean, I think that's just important to share. I don't mind criticism. That's part of the job.
So around the state, what do you find legal-wise? What are the biggest legal issues that people are most interested in?
Marijuana is pretty universal.
Okay.
Wherever you go, I'd say that's pretty universal. I would say on things that tend to be universal, although maybe for people come at it from different perspectives, would be issues related to immigration, dreamers. Because if you get in Eastern Washington, a big focus is concerns about changes in immigration policy because of so much of the economy is driven by, as you know, right?
Sure.
Agricultural
workers, right?
Huge part of it.
So what you'll hear about immigration in a Rotary in eastern parts of the state will have the same kind of view, but from a different angle than what you might hear in downtown in Seattle, right?
Sure.
It's folks have concerns, but it's from a different place, which is interesting, of course, right? So I'd say that's pretty consistent that comes up. I mean, now of course in the last year, the work against administration is a pretty universal topic, you know. So when I give my talk to Rotaries, I don't go into details of the cases. I just say, hey, we have these cases. Feel free to ask about them. It's kind of my approach. I will always get asked about them and what we're doing, why we're doing it. And there can be a difference of opinions, you know, about the wisdom of those lawsuits or how many we're filing or should we be filing them and all that. Yeah. So I'd say those are, if I had to pick maybe the top 3 things that come up pretty consistently across the board, those might be it.
Probably would have asked a lot about McClary until maybe recently too.
You know, but yeah, that's a good point. McCleary, I left that one out. I would say that it has tapered off a bit, but for a long, especially when it was the first couple of years, that would be almost every single time. McCleary would come up, and that would be a universal. I would agree with that.
Yeah,
That'd be a universal.
Yeah, what the heck are we gonna do?
Yep. And that's a good point. It's come up a little less frequently lately. Yeah.
On that, did you
Sure.
get a lot? Did a lot of people think it was an overreach by the state Supreme Court, the decision, or were they just trying to figure out, okay, how are we going to deal with this?
That's a good question. There are, you know, I'd say on McCleary there's a diverse perspective. I think a lot of folks just were grappling and asking me, well, how does that work? How can the Supreme Court tell
Sure.
the legislature's a budget? They're just, right, they're just trying to figure that out, right?
Yeah.
How does that work? And so I'm not sure what their perspective is. All I know is you can see them trying to sort that out.
Yeah.
Well, how does that, how can they do that? Can they do that? What does that mean, you know? And so I think that's the main, now often when folks will have strong views about the need for the state to do more to fund education, right?
Sure.
But in terms of the legal component, I think it's primarily that issue. How does that work? And and they're also curious what my obligation is to the state. Can I represent the students? Can I, how's our office interact with this whole complex issue as well? But I think it's primarily folks interested in that dynamic of the Supreme Court, the budget, how those two things intersect. Can the Supreme Court dictate to the legislature? Could the legislature say, nope, thanks for your input, but we're the legislature, you can't tell us what to do. So, yeah.
Some of them tried.
Yeah, right. So I do my best to answer those. Yeah.
Hey, and then real quick,
Yeah.
while you're here on the record, are you going to be a candidate for anything in 2020?
Well, I'll be hopefully a candidate for something, and
What
at this
might
point,
that be?
certainly if the governor chooses to run for a 3rd term, I'd be running for re-election. That's easy. That'd be the easiest decision I'd make. I love the job. If the governor decides to do something else, I'd have a decision to make and would make it at the right time. This isn't the year for that decision, but there'd be a right time. But I support the governor and hope he runs for a 3rd term. If he does, I'm happy if he does, and would love to run for a 3rd term and get the chance to continue the work. If he doesn't, obviously I'll be talking to my wife, who's a very private woman, and having a conversation with her and deciding what makes the most sense.
Great. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you guys. Great to see you again.
Thanks
Yeah,
a
I
lot.
really appreciate it. Yeah.